Bugs Bunny is the smartest character American animation ever produced. But he wasn't designed by a genius. He was assembled by accident, by 5 different men who couldn't stand each other, inside a studio so broke its own animators named the building after the insects living in the walls. This is the real story of how Bugs Bunny got made, and why genius is the wrong word for it. Like this video if you can still hear, "Hey, what's up, Doc?" in your head. Subscribe for more retro deep dives. Warner Bros. Animation unit didn't need a rabbit in 1938. It had Porky Pig. But director Ben Hardaway needed a fresh victim to put in front of him, so he reached for a trick that had already worked once, the same formula that gave Porky an unkillable duck a year earlier in Porky's Duck Hunt. Hardaway liked the bit enough to steal it from himself. According to colleague Martha Sigel, he told the crew he was simply going to put a rabbit suit on that duck. The result, Porky's Hare Hunt, handed Porky an unnamed white rabbit who wouldn't die, wouldn't shut up, and stole the whole cartoon out from under the character he was supposed to support. That rabbit wasn't Bugs yet. Staff called him Happy Rabbit because nobody had settled on anything better, until artist Charles Thorson labeled a 1939 model sheet Bugs Bunny, borrowing the nickname everyone at the studio already used for the guy running the unit, Ben Hardaway himself. So, the most famous rabbit in the world wasn't named after anything clever. He was named after a scribbled joke about whoever happened to be in charge that week, and he didn't belong to one director either. Chuck Jones took a turn in 1939's Presto Chango and made him a magic rabbit, nothing like the wisecracking hunter-tormentor he'd become. Hardaway and Dalton redesigned him again in Harem Scarum the same year. By the time Tex Avery got his hands on the character in 1940, Bugs Bunny had already been drawn, voiced, and rewritten by 3 separate teams who weren't building toward any single plan. He wasn't evolving. He was being reinvented from scratch, over and over by men who each thought they knew what he should be. Whoever built him, Bugs came out of a studio with no business competing with Disney at all. Leon Schlesinger ran Warner's cartoon unit like a business built around not spending money. He hired animators desperate enough to work Depression-era wages and housed them in a bungalow so run-down and bug-infested that the staff nicknamed it Termite Terrace themselves, a joke about their own conditions that outlived the building. Disney had exclusive 3-strip Technicolor, a polished house style, and prestige. Schlesinger had none of it. So his directors, Avery, Jones, Clampett, Frey-Lang, built something else instead. Cartoons that were fast, self-aware, and willing to break the fourth wall in ways Disney's careful realism never would. Schlesinger wasn't beloved for any of this. He shut the studio down twice rather than pay unionized animators a raise. He boycotted the Academy Awards outright, convinced they favored Disney. And his own staff described him as vain and over-cologned, with a pronounced lisp, one so distinctive that Mel Blanc reportedly modeled both Daffy Duck and Sylvester the Cat's voices on their own boss, without Schlesinger ever catching the joke was on him. Disney's features of the same era, Snow White, Pinocchio, Bambi, were built to sell a fully immersive illusion of life. Schlesinger's directors couldn't afford that illusion, so they punctured it instead. Bugs breaking the fourth wall to talk straight to the audience isn't a stylistic flourish. It's the byproduct of a studio that never had the money to pretend its cartoons were anything but cartoons. Even Bugs' voice exists because of Schlesinger's cheapness. Mel Blanc joined the studio in 1936, and by the time Bugs needed a permanent voice, he was already juggling dozens of characters across dozens of shorts. Schlesinger didn't want to renegotiate Blanc's rate every time a new character showed up needing one, so the 2 men struck a deal. Blanc got exclusive on-screen voice credit, a rarity for the era, not as an artistic honor, but because it let Schlesinger avoid paying him more. It turned out to be one of the most consequential cheap decisions in animation history. Locking Blanc in meant one performer's timing and instincts shaped nearly every major Warner character for decades. Bugs, Daffy, Porky, Sylvester, Yosemite Sam, Tweety, all filtered through one man's ear for a joke. Disney spread its voices across dozens of actors. Warner cartoons sound like Warner cartoons partly because a producer tried to save a few dollars and accidentally built a signature instead. If you like finding out the genius behind your favorite cartoons was actually 5 overworked guys and 1 cheapskate, that's this channel every week. Subscribe, because the 8 minutes that finally made Bugs are next. And they almost didn't happen the way you think. By 1940, Happy Rabbit had appeared in a handful of shorts, and none of them had worked. He was wacky in the same undisciplined way Daffy was wacky. Funny, but formless. So director Tex Avery didn't tweak him, he rebuilt him. Avery and animator Virgil Ross scrapped the manic energy and gave him calm instead. Casual, unbothered, leaning into danger with the dry sarcasm of a Groucho Marx bit rather than a panicked screech. Even the small physical touches were borrowed on purpose. The carrot-chomping pose, according to Freleng, echoed not Clark Gable but Roscoe Carnes's wisecracking hitchhiker from the same era of screwball films, repurposed into a piece of business that made Bugs look bored by his own danger. Then came the line nobody planned for. Avery dropped, "What's up, Doc?" into the script almost as an afterthought. Texas slang from his own childhood, nothing he thought much of. When A Wild Hare screened for an audience on July 27, 1940, the reaction to that one throwaway line told the studio immediately it wasn't a throwaway anymore, and the voice sold the rest. When Mel Blanc saw the retooled sketches, described on set as a tough little stinker, he didn't hear a cartoon animal. He heard a wisecracking city slicker, part Brooklyn, part Bronx, entirely unbothered by whoever was pointing a shotgun at him. A Wild Hare is now treated as Bugs' official debut, not because it was his first appearance, but because it's the 8 minutes where every piece other people had been building finally clicked into one coherent character. You'd expect a character built by that many hands to have a settled origin story. He doesn't, because the men who built him spent nearly as much energy fighting over credit as they'd spent building him. The clearest flashpoint came in 1975, when former director Bob Clampett released Bugs Bunny Superstar, a documentary he hosted and edited with Final Cut approval, positioning himself as the primary creator of both Bugs and Porky. Clampett had genuinely shaped some of the studio's most anarchic shorts, but his former colleagues weren't willing to let primary creators stand quietly. Chuck Jones wasn't quiet about it. Within a week of the premiere, he typed a point-by-point rebuttal and sent it to Tex Avery for notes. Avery agreed with nearly all of it, including one detail almost too petty to invent. Jones pointed out that Clampett had signed his own name onto an old Bugs model sheet he'd had nothing to do with, and the ink was noticeably less faded than everything else on the page. Jones got the last word visually. His 1979 compilation, The Bugs Bunny / Roadrunner Movie, shows Bugs wandering a mansion past portraits of his several fathers, Avery, Freleng, McKimson, Jones himself. Clampett's portrait is conspicuously absent. An entire authorship feud buried inside a kid's cartoon, settled in a single frame only the men who lived it would fully understand. Nobody ever won the argument outright. Historians generally credit Hardaway and Dalton with the prototype, Avery with the definitive personality, Blanc with the voice, and Bob Givens and Robert McKimson with the design that finally stuck. So the honest answer to who created Bugs Bunny isn't a name. It's a list, assembled by men who spent their careers arguing about the order. Whatever the fighting cost them personally, the character it produced didn't just compete with Disney's mascot. By some measures, he beat him. Theater owner polls in the mid-1930s already had the Happy Rabbit prototype ahead of Mickey Mouse before Bugs was even fully formed. Once A Wild Hare locked him in, that lead only widened. The war turned him from a box office draw into a national mascot. After Bugs appeared in full Marine Corps dress blues in the 1943 short Super Rabbit, the Marine Corps leaned into the joke rather than ignore it, enlisting him as an honorary private, and by the war's end, promoting him on paper to Master Sergeant. A cartoon rabbit invented to annoy Porky Pig technically outranked most of the men who'd watched him in a theater before shipping out. The recognition kept compounding. Nighty Night Bugs won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short in 1958, the same Academy Schlesinger once accused of rigging things for Disney. In 1985, Bugs became the only Warner Bros character with his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And in 1997, he became the first cartoon character ever featured on a U.S. postage stamp, a distinction Mickey Mouse, for all of Disney's budget and polish, wouldn't reach for years. None of it happened because one visionary sat down and designed a masterpiece. It happened because a cheap studio, a stubborn producer, and a handful of animators who couldn't stand each other kept competing to outdo one another. And the rabbit born out of that friction outlasted every one of them. Bugs Bunny wasn't built by a genius. He was built by an underpaid director putting a rabbit suit on a joke that had already worked once, refined by animators working out of a condemned shack because the real studios wouldn't hire them, voiced by a man locked into a deal designed to save his boss money, and claimed, decades later, by half a dozen people who never fully forgave each other for disagreeing about it. That's not the story of one brilliant mind. That's the story of a rivalry that never really ended. Men who spent careers proving they'd built the smartest character in American animation and never once agreed on who actually had. That's the secret history of Bugs Bunny.